Good afternoon. My name is Joseph Lloyd, and I am a huge fan of cars used in old British TV series filmed between the late 1950s and late 1990s. Join me on a journey as we look back on over 40 years of British television and its relationship with the automobile. I made a selection of videos last year talking about a lot of these series, and I'm doing it again to make them even better. Well, from one possible sequel to Danger Man, which was The Prisoner, to another one, which is Man in a Suitcase. Now, I'm not saying that it never was intended to be that, but a lot of the same team that worked on Danger Man, including Sidney Cole, who was the producer, went straight to work on Man in a Suitcase. In fact, The Prisoner and Man in a Suitcase started filming in the same month, which was September in 1966. However, Man in a Suitcase had a lot more episodes. The Prisoner only managed 17 episodes, with filming going on until February 1968. Man in a Suitcase had finished filming in December 1967 after 30 episodes. So in that way, it was a little bit more sort of conventional, a bit more kind of along the traditional ITC lines. And, you know, if you like Danger Man, then you'll probably like Man in a Suitcase. It stars Richard Bradford, an American actor who was in, I think, his late 20s when production of Man in a Suitcase was happening in 1966 to 7. And he had premature sort of grey hair, which, you know, gave him a little bit more of the kind of feeling that he'd been around the block a bit. Although, you know, he was still quite young. He was one of these method actors, and so what he would do would be to kind of come onto the set if he needed to feel like he was exhausted. He'd run around the studios, and then they'd start the take and he would be exhausted, and do things like that. Man in a Suitcase is one of the only ITC series that I actually have which has a 15 certificate, because there is a lot of violence in it. There is a lot of kind of suspense and sort of, you know, gruesomeness in it. A lot of the themes in it are really quite nasty as well. There's stuff like escaping from East Germany. There's political corruption in Africa. There's all kinds of things. I wouldn't say it's my favourite ITC series. I think possibly ITC I always kind of associate really with a bit of escapism. So, you know, you watch The Champions, that's pretty escapist, and so is Randall Hawkeye Deceased. Whereas Man in a Suitcase really isn't. It feels very, very gritty and real, and that's the way Richard Bradford was really wanting to do it. It was broadcast between 1967 and 1968. There was only one series, and it was filmed at Pinewood Studios. So it maybe had a little bit of a nicer look to it than the stuff on the Elstree. Something like The Champions would be the thing that was in production around the same time that's closest to it in the kind of comparisons of the way they made it. So it didn't feel as cheap as, say, a Monty Berman produced series at Elstree, which is, you know, the standard for which most of these are actually assessed against. But it's not, you know, the most expensive show. They still use stock footage. They still use, you know, lots of sets and everything like that. And you still have this idea of they're just swapping number plates on cars to make them look like they're somewhere else where they're not. So, you know, that's not really changed. Whether or not you should watch Man in a Suitcase in 2020, well, we'll get to that a bit later. Man in a Suitcase, because it sort of talks about the adventures of an American detective, or really he's a former CIA agent who's been disgraced through no fault of his own, essentially, and you really get a sense of that in the episode Man from the Dead, which was supposed to be the pilot, but it actually was broadcast some way down the order. He has a much more kind of humble method of transportation. He doesn't roll around in, I don't know, Bentleys and Aston Martin and things like that. The main car that he uses is a 1965 Hillman Super Imp. It's actually a Roots press car. It was fitted with a 1000cc engine, and that appears in, my gosh, it's a lot of episodes I've got not here. It appears in 7 episodes, FHP 198C. That was also used by Motor Magazine after it had been the press car. Interesting kind of colours, like a yellowy green colour. That's probably the car most associated with McGill, Richard Bradford's character. McGill doesn't have a first name, by the way, he's too tough for that. There are also a few other Roots group cars that he drives in the series. In Man from the Dead, as I said, that was supposed to be the pilot episode. They filmed it first, but didn't broadcast it first in the end. There's a 1963 Hillman Imp Deluxe 109 GXH, not a press car or anything. You can see that, he doesn't necessarily need things like that because he's too kind of hard-boiled for things like press cars normally. In Jigsaw Man, there's a 1965 Hillman Imp, FPX 672C, again, not a press car. In Day of Execution, which is one of my favourite episodes of Man in a Suitcase, he drives a 1965 Ford Zephyr 6 EJU 444C. We'll come back to that number plate in a little while. In All That Glitters, which is an episode filmed a lot in the Cotswolds, it's quite a nice location filming on that one. He drives a Triumph Herald 1200 Estate. Now, there's 2 of those. The main one is a 63 model CMT 444A, but in some of the shots that are filmed nearer to the studios in Buckinghamshire, he uses a second car, which is a 65 model ADD 904C. Sort of interesting yellow colour, that car. The last Roots Group car that I'm aware that he drives is a 1964 Singer Chamois. This is right toward the end of production for Man in a Suitcase, so maybe November 67. And I think they probably wanted to put him in one of these kind of imp type cars. It's not an actual imp, it's a Singer Chamois, but they're essentially the same. JML 272B, and that's an episode called Castle in the Clouds. Now, just because McGill doesn't get to drive interesting cars himself, it doesn't mean there's not a lot of interesting cars in Man in a Suitcase. In fact, there are. I'm going to have to cut out quite a lot of them because otherwise we'd be here all day. But in an episode called Essay and Evil, there are a lot of interesting cars, and we'll just cover some of them. There's a 1964 Alfa Romeo Giulia 1600 Spider. There's a 1962 Alvis TD 3 litre. The only other type of car of that type I've seen in a 60s TV series is in The Avengers with a TE21. This particular one is an Alvis press car, funnily enough. I don't know quite whether Alvis still gave out press cars in 1967. I think this was filmed. Essay and Evil, as far as I know. But yes, maybe. This is 2162 VC. And in Property of a Gentleman, there's a 1967 Aston Martin DB6 Volante, which is interesting. That's a sort of, I think it's called Dubonnet red colour. The plate on that looks like a fake one. It says SN15, but that's probably a fake plate. In the episode Somebody Loses, Somebody Wins, there is a car chase between a 1966 BMW 2000 CS and a 1958 Moskvitch 407. Both of those cars in Britain were incredibly rare, and the episode was directed by John Glenn, who directed the Bond films in the 1980s, all of them, in fact, all 5 of them, and was before that an editor on the Bond films. So it's interesting to see what his sort of work was like in the 60s. Now, the Moskvitch 407 being such a rare car, I don't even know how they got hold of that, to be honest, was replaced in a scene where they have to blow it up by a 1954 Ford Prefect that you'll be seen in the pictures. It's not actually that bad a likeness in terms of doing that, but yeah, you know, they went out of their way to try to do it properly, although the idea of the East German police having a BMW 2000 CS, I think, is a bit ludicrous in that sort of time, but never mind. In Three Blinks of an Eye, there's a 1962 Citroen DS19, and in The Man Who Stood Still, there is a 1961 Fiat 1500. Now, that really should be a Seat, because it's supposed to be set in Spain, but it looks kind of downhill enough, the bumpers are falling off and everything, so we'll let that one pass. In Night Flight to Andorra, which is the last episode of Man in a Suitcase, there's another Fiat 1500, but this is a Fiat 1500 Spider. That looks absolutely beautiful. Sorry, it's Cabriolet, not Spider. It's a 1500 Cabriolet. Now, that has the worst fake plates I've ever seen in any series. They look terrible, and you would have seen a photograph of those a few moments ago. Lovely car, bad fake plates. In Day of Execution, the other car that I will mention is a 1962 Hillman Super Minx convertible. Now, that one also has the same plate as the Ford Zephyr 6 we mentioned a few minutes ago, EJU 444C. There's a scene where the Zephyr 6 and the Super Minx have been chasing each other around Kingston-on-Thames, where I used to go shopping when I lived in the area. And the Bental Centre, or just Bentals it was at the time, you can see that in the background of some of the shots. You also end up in the same kind of area in Pinewood Studios where they filmed the chase with the DB5 in Goldfinger. Fascinating, really. Anyway, in Jigsaw Man, there's another car chase with McGill. This time he's in the very basic Hillman Imp, so trying to take on a 1960 Jaguar Mark II doesn't end very well for him. That's 96 FLL for those who are paying attention to such things. In Web with Four Spiders, McGill has a 1961 Jaguar E-Type Roadster. Don't know what the plate is on that one. I can't really see it. It's very dark. In Why They're Called Nolan, another Jaguar. It's a 1964 Jaguar Mark X BPU 190B. I've actually been to one of the locations where we filmed Why They're Called Nolan. In fact, the main location there, which is near Pinewood Studios. I've been there a couple of times. Very nice, actually. In Sweet Sue, there's a 1965 Jaguar E-Type, which is used in a thrilling ride down Box Hill that you would have seen in the photograph. I like Box Hill very much, and they used to like to throw cars off there because it's ITC. But in this particular instance, the G-Type doesn't fall off the edge, so that's lovely. Funnily enough, the second most common car that you see in Man in a Suitcase is a police car. It's a 1962 Wolseley 6110 649 CLC. Now, that appears in 5 episodes. Some people say that doesn't quite match up in terms of the car being the same one and just a false plate they stick on. I don't really know. You know, I suppose it might be. In Revolutionaries, we see some nice Swedish cars. There's a 1967 Volvo 1800S. I imagine they just borrowed that from the Saint. There's also 1965 Saab 95. There is another name for the 95 in Swedish, this type of 95, but I'm not going to say it. And there's also a 1965 Saab 96, also known as a Saab Sport, with that little light on the top. I imagine it's sort of Eric Carlson Type 1. In SA and Evil, there's a 1964 Volvo Amazon CAP721B. The other car of note in Web Before Spiders is a 1953 Rolls-Royce Silver Wraith by Hooper, OGW88. That appears in a French film, I think, of the same kind of era. In Night Flight to Andorra, the car that tows the glider is a 1957 Cadillac Fleetwood 60 Special. Very rare car to see that in Britain at the time. And then in Three Blinks of the Eye, there's a 1967 Porsche 911 with a very nice sort of oval number plate. So, is Man in a Suitcase worth watching in 2020? Well, yes, frankly. The theme tune by Ron Grainer is actually famous these days for being the theme tune to TFI Friday, and I'm afraid we can't talk about Chris Evans on this channel for obvious reasons, so we won't be able to talk about that. But Ron Grainer actually wrote the theme tunes to things like Doctor Who, Tales of the Unexpected. He wrote the theme tune to Man in the Suitcase as well. That's just the name of it, Man in the Suitcase. So yeah, he was very, very good at what he did and wrote some of the most memorable theme tunes of all time. The series itself is interesting. Richard Bradford is quite an intense actor. It depends if you like that or not. The music by Albert Elms, who is the same composer who did incidental music for The Prisoner. Actually, I forgot to say, Ron Grainer also wrote the theme tune to The Prisoner on the advice of Patrick McGowan. So, yes, memorable music, very, very kind of sort of different type of show. Maybe quite refreshing from some of the other ITC stuff, but it is a bit violent. It is a bit intense. Depends what you like, really. Anyway, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more cars on television. Don't forget to like this video and to leave a comment below. Also visit my Instagram page, Lloyd Vehicle Consulting, and my Facebook page, www.facebook.com/Lloyd Vehicle Consulting. Thank you ever so much indeed once again for watching.